Fellow Chelsea supporters, this episode we are going to be talking about and remembering one of the most loved and popular managers in Chelsea's history. A man who guided Chelsea to promotion to the First Division back in 1984, and he brought in players that would become legends at the club, like Kerry Dixon and Pat Nevin, just to name a few. This episode will be highlighting the Chelsea career of Mr. John Neal. Joining me is a very special guest. Here is his son, David Neal. David, welcome to the show. How are you and the family? And how's life in the good old US of A?
Well, it's great over here. It's sunny and enjoying life here. Obviously, miss the football or soccer as we call it here. And am I allowed to say that?
You of course you can. Of course you can. We're uncensored on this show, so you can say whatever you want.
It's great. The family, the grandchildren are all football fans, and they play football themselves. I coach still, so it's great. It's great to. The great thing about football here, it's coming on, and it's getting more and more interesting. You just need to look at the supporters club Chelsea's got, with Atlanta, Miami, all over the country, and it's it's great. It really is good, and America's really come into the forefront with a lot of interest for football. So yes, it's great to be here. Good time.
Before we sort of discuss your father, I just want to sort of talk about, as you say, the impact of football that's gone in America. Of course, you've got the World Cup coming up in a couple of years in America. You've got the Premier League clubs that constantly go over there every pre-season for friendlies. Do you think it'll be a case whereby maybe one day, and it's probably not too far-fetched considering what the Chelsea owner Todd Bowley's sort of talking about in regards to football all-star games, do you think there'll come a point where this 39th game will then be reintroduced and then you're going to get competitive league games over in the States?
Yeah, because it's gone the other way with American football. It's obviously happening over in London just recently, I believe, at Tottenham's ground, where they're having American. I think it could happen here. I think it would be great. I hope they come to Charlotte, where I am. They have the facilities. The one thing about here, Keith, is the facilities are phenomenal. I coach under 12-year-olds here, and we've got floodlights, and we've got a beautiful pitch. And it's fantastic facilities. I used to remember when I was playing at their age, I used to be up to my ankles in mud, and we never had goal nets. That's one thing for sure. You were lucky if you had goal posts.
Yeah.
So it's coming that way. And so to answer your question, yeah, I think it would be good for it to come that way. The issue with the football over here is that we don't have promotion and relegation. And it really takes a lot of the interest for me, who I'm used to that type of excitement, great excitement if you're getting promotion, but a bit of down in the doldrums if you're down at the bottom. But it adds that excitement, and they don't have that. It's if you're not in the top one or two playing for the championship, what else you got to play for? And I've argued that case over here many times, and it goes through the same with all American sports. There's no promotion and relegation, but I think it'll come. One of my dad's old teams, Wrexham, they've been taken over by Ryan Reynolds and Ron McInerney.
That's right, yeah.
And we follow them. I don't know whether you've been watching the Welcome to Wrexham thing on Disney Channel.
That's been a popular documentary over here.
Yeah. And it's great to see it. And the interest that they've generated just for a small team like Wrexham, which is close to my heart as well, because that's who gave my dad the first opportunity in management. It's fantastic how it's actually generating a lot of interest. And they had nothing to do with football. Those two, they admit they don't even know the offside rule. So. Although I've got to tell
you... Not many refs know the offside rule.
I was going to say, some of the refs I know don't know the offside rule, but there we are. So, yeah, it really is coming out. So, to your point, yes, I think it's coming up. I think they've got a few things they need to tweak, but I think we'll get there one day.
Well, The purpose of today's show, we're going to talk about your father and talk about the legacy that he left behind at Chelsea, that people that I know, that I sometimes speak to at the Bridge, still talk about to this day. So just to do the introductions, John Neal was born on the 13th of April 1932 in County Durham. He became a professional footballer and played for clubs such as Hull City, Swindon, Aston Villa and Southend. The first question I've got for you, David, was what was it like back then when your dad was a professional footballer? Was you able to see much of him, especially with the different travels that he had? What was life like for you back then?
I think it's certainly a lot more different than what it is today for a footballer. That's one thing for sure. My dad was from the northeast, as you mentioned, basically based just outside Sunderland. My grandfather was a shop owner, but my dad had three offers. As a young guy, he played for a little team called Silksworth, a village of Silksworth. And he had the managers of three clubs went to my grandfather and asked him to play for him. One was Sunderland, one was Manchester United, and one was Hull City. And my grandfather promised that my father would play for Hull City, Reg Carter. If you look back at that old name, one of the best managers Hull City ever had. So my father went to Hull City, and during that time he went to the RAF. He did his national service for 2 years, and met my mother, and I came along in Hull. And then he kind of, after the national service, it went down a little bit. In fact, you missed one club out, and not many people know this. He actually went to Kings Lynn. Right. And he was a part-time player there, and he was training to be a pharmacist, believe it or not. But very quickly, a guy, and you'll probably know this, the name, the manager of Swindon Town, Bertie Mee, came along and snapped him up. But he wasn't at Swindon for very long because another famous manager by the name of Joe Mercer came along at Aston Villa, and that was the pinnacle for my father's playing career. Now, I didn't get to see, I was still very young in those days, but I always remember my first thoughts of Aston Villa was when he was signed on. I used to stay with Joe Mercer and his wife, Noreen, because we didn't have a house. So I stayed there because I was going to school. I just started school. And we bought a house in Sutton Coldfield just outside. And we had a lodger, the centre forward of Aston Villa by the name of Derek Dugan. I don't remember Derek Dugan was the Wolves. He actually owned Wolves at the end, but he used to lodge. He used to come. He used to be a flashy guy. He used to have a white Jaguar, bald head, and he's quite a famous Villa player. And he used to pick me up in this white Jaguar from school, which was a bit of a novelty for me. So remember that type of thing. But I think I remember probably one game at the Villa because it was still around the 60 time. 1960. One thing that he did win, he was the first in the first team to actually win the League Cup. There we go. There's my father's tankard from the first ever League Cup final and winner.
Wow.
So there we are. I actually got that one. Needs a bit of a polish at the moment, but yeah, they played Rotherham in the final and they won it in 1960-61. And then he was getting to the end of his career, and then he went to Southend United, which was quite funny because as a youngster, let me go back. My brother Andrew, he was born in Swindon, and a funny thing, when he was born, the night he was born, my dad was playing at Portsmouth for Swindon Town, so he didn't get to be at the birth of my brother. So yeah, and then we went to Southend. Liked Southend because it had a beach. A bit of a beach.
Some perks.
And, yeah. And that's actually where he met Ian McNeil, his assistant at Chelsea. And they got together, got on well, and he had 4 years there and retired. And then I started to see a lot of the Southend games. Unfortunately, towards the end of the career, it was actually Southend reserves, which was a shame because, it was my dad and he'd been at the top with Chelsea. He played at the top of the first division. He won the second division championship with Aston Villa as well. So, but anyway, he came to the end and he retired. But during that time at Southend, he actually got his coaching badge and his medical certificates and all that good stuff for football. But there was no opportunities for him. So he went to, believe it or not, he went to work for Ford's in Dagenham. And he worked there for 6 months. And there's a funny story. He went with his boots and asked if he could play for Ford's, the football team there. You know, they had a football team. And they said, yeah, but you're going to have to just play in the fifth tier, the fifth league, fifth team, I should say. Anyway, he turned up with his boots, and my dad said he heard the guy, the coach or the manager of the fifth team, on the phone to the guy who run the whole lot. He says, "Hey, we've got a guy here. I think he's played a bit before." He says, "But I don't think he should be in this league," because at half time he gave the talk, and they hadn't won a game in months. And they actually won that game on the back of my dad giving the team talk at halfway through. That team actually became Dagenham and Redbridge. So the Ford's team became Dagenham and Redbridge. So he had another team he played for.
Wow.
Yeah. So there we are. Anyway, a guy called Alvin Williams, who was the manager of Southend United, knocked on our door one day in Southend, and he said, "Look, do you fancy coming up as an assistant kind of trainer type of thing for Wrexham?" So my dad loves football, as you know, he loves football. And so there we off we went up to Wrexham. And he was within, I think it was probably a season, he was the manager. As he said, nobody else wanted the job. So they gave it to him. And he worked, he was there for 10 years. And I think it was probably some of the, I've always got a soft spot for Wrexham because they gave him the first opportunity, and unlike today, Keith, they gave him time. Ken Bates was the same. He gave him time. You don't get time today. You know, it's ridiculous that my dad, and I'm sorry, tell me to stop if.
No. The floor's yours, David. No, by all means, you carry on.
It's ridiculous that I think Dave Sexton and my dad are the longest serving managers for Chelsea, and it's like 4 or 5 years. It's crazy, you know. It's like you look at the managers and they're like there for the six months to 2 years if they're lucky, and it's gone. And I think it's a shame, and I think it's to the detriment of the club, the supporters, and also football as a whole. But yeah, so he went to Wrexham, and that's how we ended up there at Wrexham. And he got promotion on a number of occasions, got to the quarterfinals of the European Cup Winners' Cup.
That's right.
There. They got twice to the quarterfinals of the FA Cup. And he generated a lot of great players, and we'll probably talk about those as well.
Well, I was going to say, he started his career at Wrexham, and he done superbly well with them, bearing in mind he beat a lot of big clubs in the cup competitions. He then went on to Middlesbrough after his stint at Wrexham. He was there for a couple of years, and then in 1981 he got the call to take the manager's job at Chelsea. Do you remember this moment in time, and what was the family's reaction to having your dad making the move to London, bearing in mind you was sort of quite settled in Wrexham, then you had to travel all the way up to Teesside and then come from there all the way back down to London? What was sort of the family's reaction like? Did you sort of happy about constantly moving, or was there sort of a bit of trepidation from...
Well, it was quite interesting because by then I'd got married anyway. Right. So I was settled with my wife, and we were just having a young family then, and Joanne and Samantha were coming along, my 2 daughters, and that's what my mother wanted. She wanted granddaughters. She didn't want grandsons. She'd had enough with 2 sons. But anyway, they said, "Look, let me just explain what happened with the Middlesbrough thing, because one thing I can say about my dad, he was in the 3 clubs he managed, he was never sacked, which he was quite proud of. At Wrexham, he left for Wrexham on the back of Jack Charlton. Jack Charlton left Middlesbrough, But what had happened at the end of the season, and they just missed out on promotion to the Championship, or Division 2 as it was, having led that league for, I would say, 90% of the time, the last 2 games, just they didn't turn up. Anyway, that's another story. But he found out that he was speaking to the chairman, and the chairman came, and they were walking on the pitch. And I remember I was actually at the ground. And the chairman said to him, he said, look, halfway through the season, Aston Villa came and asked if you would be interested in taking their managerial role. And my dad was upset about it because he hadn't been told. He did, because Villa was the team. He played for Villa and won some nice competitions with them. And he was really upset about it. And that's what kind of made him leave. He says, you don't do that to people, to take away that opportunity. He never did it with his players. When he had Michael Thomas and Joey Jones at Wrexham, he didn't stop them going Michael to Manchester United and Joey to Liverpool because it benefited him. He made sure he had replacements for them, but he always put the player first. He looked after the player. He didn't like agents because he said, I'll look after you. But that's a different world today. So anyway, so Middlesbrough came in for him. One thing he made sure that Wrexham had a good manager, his assistant, Arvin Griffiths, and he took over Wrexham, and my dad went to Middlesbrough. And that was hard because it kind of was my mum and dad were leaving us because we'd been with us all the time at Wrexham and they left us. And it was funny. My wife and I had to get married on a Friday because Middlesbrough were playing Manchester United on the Saturday. So we had to make sure we were married on a Friday. My wife still has a dig at me about that today. But she understood. Angela understood. She's had to adapt to the football way of life, and she did very well. It was very hard for her to come in, and the first we went out for dinner one Sunday, and with my dad and mum and my brother, and we met up with the Daily Express reporter. We had lunch with him, and we sat there, and she had to understand that this was part of the family's life. I think one of the funniest stories I've got, Keith, and as I say, this may be. When my dad was manager of Middlesbrough, very young in the time with Middlesbrough, they were playing Everton on a Saturday, and the team came down to Liverpool to stay overnight in Liverpool, and Angela and I were going to have dinner with him. So we drove to Liverpool and we got to the hotel there, and we said there was 2 security guys on the door, and I said, look, I'm here to have dinner with Mr. John Neal, the manager of Middlesbrough. And he says, yeah, he's through there. He's over there with Mr. Bill Shankly over having dinner. So we went over, and Angela sat next to Bill Shankly, and I sat next to my dad. Bill Shankly said to Angela, he said, do you like football? And she said, yeah. And she said, I do. That was the only words that we said during the dinner. My dad and Bill Shankly talked about people like Tom Finney and Stanley Matthews and the experiences they had. It was phenomenal. And Angela and I just sat there, and so we can at least say we had dinner with them, but we didn't say much during that. So she had to get introduced into football quite early in our marriage, and she's put up with a lot. But that was one of the things. But talking about Middlesbrough, he went there, and they were mid-table in the first division. Doing okay. He bought a couple of players. One thing he didn't spend a lot of money on players.
Oh no, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah,
definitely. Yes,
I've got some statistics here, and it's quite interesting. It staggered me. Anyway, so he bought Billy Ashcroft from Wrexham and a couple of others, and they started to pull together well. And I got to a lot of games up there because we visited my mum and dad, and they lived in Redcar, and we went to a lot of games. But as we went through that time at Middlesbrough, he created quite a good team with David Hodgson, Craig Johnson, Graham Souness, some really good David Armstrong, who ended up playing for England. But unfortunately, again, an issue with the chairman. he built a big complex attached to Ayresome Park, which was a gym and a restaurant and everything else. And he wanted to be paid. And he told my dad he's got to start selling players. Well, he'd sold a few. He'd sold Graham Souness to Liverpool. He'd sold David Hodgson to Liverpool. He sold David Mills to West Bromwich Albion. You know, but he was asked us now, the people that he brought in to replace him, Craig Johnson, Ian Proctor, and people like that, he wanted to sell them as well. So my dad said, that's enough. You know, I'll go so far and, you know, I'll make money for you by selling players, but not at the detriment of the supporters who are coming through that gate every week to support a good team. You can't sell the best players. And that's where he walked out. He actually walked out. And that was 4 years he had them. And they did pretty well. Again, they got through to the semi-final or quarterfinal of the FA Cup again. And, you know, and they were up there. They did very, very well. And so that's when he left Middlesbrough. And the opportunity came. I think there was 5 clubs that came for him after that. And Wrexham was one of them. AEK Athens, of all teams, was another. St. Louis was another. Northampton Town, and I think it was Warsaw. So the 5 teams that are, you know, but then Chelsea came along. And so we had a discussion. Obviously, my wife and I and the kids lived in Wrexham. We said, "Oh, come back to Wrexham." You know, I think they were still in the Championship at the time, at the division. I said, "Come back to Wrexham, can't he?" But my father was a great believer in never going back. You know, if you've been successful, don't go back. And he said, this is a great opportunity. And he said, it's not the Chelsea it is today by a long way.
Oh, God, no.
Yeah, this club was on the verge of bankruptcy. I mean, on the verge. To the point when he took the job, and I was pleased he took the job because it's a big club no matter what. You know, it's even though they were bottom or in the second division, struggling, a lot of money going out on wages and things like that, they're still a big club. But the funny thing is, so he took the job, and it was Jeff Hurst he took over from.
That's right.
Yeah, and Bobby Gould was, I think, the assistant at the time.
Yeah.
And Bobby stayed for a couple of weeks anyway. But anyway, the funny thing is, when he was at Wrexham, he had a nice brand new Ford Granada car. He goes to Chelsea, he has a second-hand Datsun. So that shows you how bad the money was. And it was great because he got there and he looked at it and he didn't realize how bad it was from a financial point of view. And he had players there that I'm trying to be polite, but they felt they were owed to be a player at Chelsea. I mean, Dad wanted people that had come into the Chelsea team and fight and die for those supporters and for the club. And that's what he was brought up with at Wrexham and at Middlesbrough, that they would, you know, they go out in that field and that shirt they're wearing, that's it. So he had to make some big decisions. But before that happened, before even the first season, about 6 weeks into the close season, he was starting to put things together as best he could. Lord Chelsea came in and Mr. Myers, Mr. Mears, the chairman, and said, "We've got some bad news." And my dad said, "You can't sack me. I haven't even kicked a ball yet." You know, and I remember him saying that to them. He said, "I told them I haven't kicked a ball. They can't sack me." So he said, No. He says, "We've sold the club. You've got a new boss." And he said, "Okay." And he goes, "Yeah, his name's Ken Bates." And I've got to tell you, Keith, I think from Chelsea's point of view, that era is the reason why Chelsea is here today. Ken Bates, he came in, he inherited my dad. He inherited Ian McNeil. He didn't inherit the team because my dad sorted that out eventually.
Yes.
But he inherited it. And for somebody to come in and inherit a club like Chelsea as the chairman, sit down and talk to my dad and say, okay, what's I want to give you a chance. What's your plan? And he laid out a plan, and it wasn't a plan for a year, or it wasn't a plan for 18 months or 2 years. It was a plan for 3, 4, 5 years down the line. And he says, I can't turn this club around tomorrow. He said, it's going to be hard. And Ken Bates gave him the opportunity. And Ken Bates had he said, if you sort out the playing side, to me dad, he said, if you sort out the playing side, I'll sort out the other side. And he had a hell of a job. And the reason being, there was developers that wanted Stamford Bridge.
That's right, yeah.
And there was even, my dad brought him home. There was even blueprints of Stamford Bridge. The only sporting event that was on that, where Stamford Bridge sits today, was a tennis court on top of a high-rise building. That was it. And it kind of was breaking my dad's heart, but knowing that Ken Bates, if you want somebody on your side to get something done, he was the guy. And he got on wonderfully. A lot of people, Chelsea supporters, say, how do you get on with Ken Bates? They were like a house on fire. They got on really well because you have my dad, who was really quiet but tough as nails, and you had Ken Bates, who was totally the opposite way, tough as nails and not very quiet. He told you as it was. And it was a very good relationship he had with Ken Bates. A little bit at the end, right at the end, when he left Chelsea, but that was inevitable, and that was another story. But he gave him the opportunity. And the first season, I think they ended up 12th in the league. It was the next season of my dad's that they really avoided relegation.
That's right, yes.
Yeah. And I remember him being asked, he said, what would have happened if he got relegated? He goes, Ian and I would have had to go, I'm sure. We would have gone. So he's got a lot of respect for people like Clive Walker, who actually, that one goal at Bolton.
That goal against Bolton, yes.
Yeah, that helped us stay up. I was at that game, actually. And,
well, I was going to ask, when John became the Chelsea manager, and he obviously told you certain things about trying to change the club's fortunes, did you attend any of the Chelsea matches in the early days at Stamford Bridge? And what sort of stories have you got of those particular games? And did you ever sort of get to meet some of the players as well?
Oh yeah, I knew a lot of the players, and do today. It's in fact, I'll tell you a story about a couple of the players, but I can say that I think the one game that upset me, we played the year that we were really close to the bottom and really in danger of, I think that was it 82, 83?
That's right, yes.
We went to Fulham, and I was sat in the stand with Chelsea supporters. But in Fulham, you have to walk across in front of the stand, and I was with the Chelsea supporters there. My dad got me the tickets, and he was booed, and it hurt me, and it hurt my dad, because I knew what he was going on behind the scenes and what he was trying to do. And I think it's like all supporters, some of them wanted a little bit of instant success. Now, the interesting thing is, a year later, and we drew 1-1 that day at Fulham, and a year later we went there, sat in the same place, and he walked across there, and you would have thought that it was, he was just the king. We won 5-3. We were on our way to a great season, and it's amazing what a year can make. And I got the downs and the highs. But in fact, to the point of the 82-83 season, he stopped Angela and I going to the games.
Right.
Yeah, he had a number of threats and things like that. And he said, it's not the best place to be at the moment. He says, we'll get it turned around. He says, come back next year. And, it's, and I was playing still. I actually played a little bit for Wrexham still, in their third team and second team. And that was only part time. So I couldn't get down as much as I wanted, but I got to see a lot of the games, especially the following season. So we were talking about players, and if I got to know players, and I'll tell you a funny story about Michael Thomas and Joey Jones. Know them well, still in contact with them, but on a cold Sunday afternoon when my dad was manager at Wrexham, he used to have a scout by the name of Evan Williams up on the North Wales coast. And every now and then we'd hold trials at Llandudno Borough Football Club. On a Sunday, he'd collect all these trialists and they'd have a game. My dad and his assistant, Arvin, would go down and watch and see if there was anybody there. So one Sunday afternoon we went, and it was awful weather. Anyway, my dad said, "Look, we're short of a play. Will you play?" I said, "Yeah." So I played and went through the whole trial. And he said, "Well, what did you think?" And I was only 16, 17 at this time. You know, I was playing in the youth team. And I said, "No, there wasn't anybody there." And he goes, "Oh," he says, "I think there's 2 players." Shows you how much I know about football. You know, he says, "There's something about them I like." So the next thing is he comes over. These 2 lads arrive at our house and stay the night. And he's got them on trial at Wrexham. It's Michael and Joey. And he gets some lodgings just up the road from us, and he has them as apprentices on the ground staff, and great characters. We used to play in the youth team together, in the B3 team together, and fantastic characters. Except they didn't like to be away from home. On a Monday, mate, you could guarantee that the first trip my dad would be making would be to Colwyn Bay to pick Michael up from his mum and dad's because he didn't want to be away from home. So he used to do that, and they're both from great families. And I always remember that my dad letting them go to Manchester United and Liverpool, and then to Chelsea. When they came to Chelsea, my dad was over the moon that they were coming because they needed. Joey came a little early, and he says, "I think the Chelsea supporters will like this lad." And I said, "Like Joey? What's there not to like about Joey?" So anyway, the first game's against Carlisle. And Joey's on there, and he comes through. And one of my dad's best friends. He was best friends with Bill Shankly, Brian Clough, and a gentleman called Bob Stokoe, who was the Sunderland manager. But at this time, he was manager of Carlisle United. And Joey goes through this winger. I mean, he just wipes him out. And Bob Stokoe's out of his dugout and coming up my dad. And I'm thinking, no, that friendship's gone, you know. But it didn't. But he was. And Joey got sent off first game.
Yeah.
And I know today that people were just a bit like that about Joey. They and I think he's probably one of the most loved players that Chelsea have ever had, and Wrexham have ever had, actually. So so that's how they came to be where they are at Chelsea through Llandudno Borough trial there. And that, as I say, I wouldn't have taken them, but guess what? You know, and I tell you something. As you go every season, I believe that you have a little dip, and we were having a dip in that 83, 84 season. We were having a little dip, and he brought in Michael. He needed just something in midfield, and Michael was the type of player. And I used to train with him at Wrexham. He'd beat you on the training pitch. He'd beat you, and he'd come back and beat you again. You know, just for fun. And I don't think people realize how good this guy and how much area he actually covered. And you just think of that midfield with Spackman and Michael Thomas in the middle. And my dad always said about Nigel Spackman, he had 3 lungs. You know, he just never stopped. And so, yeah, there's a couple of things. The sad thing about Michael and Joey was at the end, because my dad would allow players. They were homesick. They lived in Wrexham, so he allowed them for the first few days of the week to train up there. And he says, as long as they turn up for me on a Saturday, I'm very happy for them to do that and be a part of Chelsea Football Club. And that's how he ran the club. That, you know, he would look after the players, and he did that. And unfortunately, that changed when my dad left the club. And the manager then, John Hollins, actually said, "You've got to move down here or you're not in the team." And that's what happened, unfortunately. And that was the start of the breakup of the team. You know, it's rather sad in my mind that happened. But yeah, so yeah, there's some great memories there. Great memories.
Just want to touch on sort of how John was as a coach, would
Right.
he be the sort of guy that would come home, if you know, and then show his frustrations after a defeat, for example, or would he be somebody who would just sort of go home and then not talk or be worried about the football? Tomorrow's another day. Would he be that sort of kind of
Yeah, he
coach?
he doesn't never. He was a very quiet, calm type of person. Even when my brother and I were growing up, he was the type of person that if you got a look from him, you knew that was it. He didn't need to say anything. It was the same in football as well. He was very involved with the coaching. He was there. In fact, I think somewhere along here, I've got a picture which I can show you of him at Chelsea. Excuse me, there we go. There's a picture of him. I don't know whether you can actually see that.
Yep.
But there we are. That's typically it. That was him with his shorts on and he'd be out there. And he's got his coaching badge. He was a defender as a player. He was attacker as a manager. You know, here's interesting. The goals from 81 to 82, we scored, I think it was 60. I'm going to have to get my glasses on somewhere. Sorry, I'm going to put my glasses on. I actually wrote it down for you. We actually scored, where was it? Here we go. 59 goals, 81 to 82. 82 to 83, we scored 43. That was the year that we struggled.
Yeah.
Then the year that we got Terry, Pat Nevin, Michael Thomas, Paul Canoville, all these great players, we scored 90 goals that season. 90 goals. It's just, to me, that's staggering. And that's the way he was. He wanted to get out and get goals. And that's when I say he was planning for that.
Because in 82, he also brought in David Speedie.
Yeah.
What was your thoughts of him signing for Chelsea as well?
David Speedie, well, that's another thing. David came from Darlington. And my dad, and this is where it upset me a little bit that people didn't understand the work that went into Chelsea or the making of Chelsea Football Club. On a Tuesday night, cold Tuesday night, he went up to Darlington, drove from London to Darlington to watch Darlington play some other team, not sure which one it was. And he calls Ian McNeil and says, "You've got to see this lad." He said, "This guy doesn't stop. He's arrogant, he's niggly, but boy, is he a good player." He says he may fit in. So Ian came up, Ian McNeil was the most underestimated assistant manager and manager ever, I believe, because he was the guy who got Wigan Athletic into the Football League. He brilliant, and he always was very, very good with scouting of players. So my dad brought him down from Darlington. He paid a fortune for him. I think it was something like £15,000-20,000, and David came in. So he had David Speedie there, and then he bought Joey about the same time, I think. So
that's right, yeah.
And that's when Ken Bates, the chairman, at the end of that season, had the thought, well, look, we're at the bottom of the league, but he didn't, and say, let's look for somebody else. He didn't. He could see what Ian and my dad were trying to do. And that I see a big comparison also between Graham Potter today and my dad. You look at his where he played. He played in the lower leagues. He did have a couple of excursions into the Premiership or Division 1. But look at the clubs he managed. Östersund, a Swedish team out of the 4th Division. Then he went to Swansea, a Welsh club. My dad was at Wrexham with a Welsh club. And, it was kind of small, and you had to create a club on a shoestring. You didn't have all this millions and millions of pounds and dollars. Now, whether my dad would be any good with a lot of money, I'm not sure. But he bought the 13 players that he bought for Chelsea Football Club that got them promotion. He bought them for under $700,000 for everyone. That's less than 50,000. About 50,000 per player.
Well, I've got the list of some of the players, and we'll talk about sort of them from 82 and even 83. We spoke about David Speedie. I've got the sort of figures £80,000.
Yeah.
Joey Jones, £34,500. And then we'll touch on the summer of '83, that sort of the start of the promotional campaign. Eddie Nedzwicki for 45,000, Nigel Spackman for 35,000, Joe McLaughlin for 95,000, Pat Nevin for 95,000, Alan Hudson he brought back in. He returned to Chelsea. That was around 23.5, and then Kerry Dixon for 175,000.
Yeah, he went berserk there, didn't he?
Just reading those names, just obviously there was players afterwards, but just reading those initial names, that's some list.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've got to say something about Eddie Nydrisky. I can actually take credit for getting Eddie Nydrisky to Chelsea Football Club. And I told you, I met Eddie at my father's funeral, unfortunately, but it was, and I said to him, I said, "You do realise you got to Chelsea because of me?" And he said, "Well, why was that?" I said, "Well, it was a Sunday morning." I said, "I was at my mum and dad's, Angela and I, and my eldest daughter, Joan, were at my mum and dad's down there in Chalfont St. Peters, and the phone rang. So I went and picked the phone up. It was in his little snug area there. And I picked the phone up. It was Ken Bates. And he said, is your dad there? I said, yeah. He goes, I'll go and get him. He says, no, hold on a second. He says, you actually know Eddie, and have you played with him, I think, at Wrexham. What do you think? I said, I've got to tell you, I think the guy will be a Welsh international, and not just a one-off Welsh international. He'll be there for a while. I said, he's got everything. He's got the character. He's got the heart to be a great goalkeeper at a great level. And he said, okay, that's fine. I said, look, I'll go and get my dad. And he said, no, that's fine. That's all I wanted to know. And he put the phone down. So on the Monday, because we were there for a long weekend, my dad came back from work from Chelsea and come in for dinner. And he said, did you have a phone call yesterday? I said, yeah. He said, oh, I forgot to tell you. I said, Mr. Bates rang. And he says, yeah, no, he's just given me permission to buy Eddie Nydrisky. So I said to Eddie, I said, I got you that job.
What a fascinating story. That's brilliant.
Yeah, so Eddie was, and again, I was so upset. My dad was upset about Eddie because they played him. I think it was at Notts County where he injured his knee, and they shouldn't have played him. And they played him. This was when my dad wasn't manager, and he actually retired him. After that game, he couldn't play again, and my dad was upset about that because Eddie had a great future. He had at least another few years on that. Goalkeepers have longer than most other players, and so yeah. And Pat Nevin, he got him from Clyde, and if you look at all these teams that he's not going to PSG or Inter Milan,
I know.
He's going from Clyde or extraordinary. Or yes. Bournemouth, who Wrexham, they're all down there, and this is what I say. I was so happy when Graham Potter got the job because I could see here's a guy who doesn't have to pay millions. He can see this. There's a lot of managers, by the way, in the lower leagues that need a chance in the Premiership. My dad got a chance although they were struggling at the time, but he got a chance at a big club. And Ken Bates allowed him that chance, and he allowed him the time. But I don't think there's the time. I'm trying to think of the Wickham manager. I think he'll be a great manager in the Premiership one. But yeah, but funny thing about Pat, my dad loved Pat Nevin, because Ian McNeil's obviously Scottish, and he knew the Scottish players inside out, and he went up. They both went up there, and they couldn't believe it. He said they were watching him, and they fell off their chair twice, watching him weave through people. But he said, you give the ball to Pat Nevin, he said, and you can go and have a cup of tea. He says, either you still have the ball or you would have scored by the time you get back. He said he's that good on the ball. He's phenomenal. And they paid extra for him because Clyde were struggling, and they actually gave him an extra £10,000 for Pat to help them out. So yeah, he was. It was a pretty exciting time. I think he signed 13 players on, But then he joined in with people like Canoville, Chris Hutchins, Mickey Droy, Johnny Bumstead, Colin Pates, and Colin Lee. I think one of the best from the players that were Chelsea, from the foundation of Chelsea. I think he was so happy with Paul Canoville. Paul was he was a little different. There was two players like that. Peter Rhodes Brown was the same. He loved Peter Rhodes Brown. He was so fast. My dad loved fast wingers. Pat wasn't so fast, but he had the skill to go with it. He said to Peter Rhodes Brown once, and I asked Peter because I heard this, that in the dressing rooms at half time, Peter was great at very fast, and he gets to the corner, and he doesn't know what to do with it. So he said to Peter, he said, look, when you've got the ball, get down that wing, get to the corner flag, turn left. He said, turn left and go down there. And then he started complaining at him about he got down to the corner flag so quickly. He could have been that quick that he could have got his centre and headed it in as well. He was so quick. But yeah, so he loved those wingers, but Paul Canoville was something different. He was fast, quick, and he just had everything, personality, and I'm so pleased for Paul that he's doing well at the moment.
Now, the 83-84 season would go down as one of the most probably memorable seasons for certain Chelsea supporters, because that was the season we went back up to the First Division. We would end up winning the league that season. As you say, we scored 80 to 90 plus goals with the team that we had, and it was a very popular team. And it must have been a great achievement for your father and for in fact, your whole family to see him being part of that promotional side for Chelsea.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. In fact, there is the medal. There's the medal. That's the Second Division Championship medal of Chelsea.
Wow.
So I was lucky enough that I inherited a few of these things. It was. It was a surreal season, really. It was because at the beginning of the season, the chairman came in and said, look, you've got 6 games. He says, you've got 6 games. I'm willing to put some money up, and let's see what we can do. Well, he didn't need 6 games. The first game, I think was it Derby we played? I can't remember who we played in that. But we won like big, like 4-0. And he kind of, it was great to see kind of some relief come after a really tough 82-83 to see. And he didn't sit back, obviously, but the players, he brought all these players in, Pat Nevin and Nigel and Kerry, and they gelled with Speedie and a few others, and Joe McLaughlin from Middlesbrough. They gel so quickly, and it's very unusual. Normally, you have 6 months to actually gel a team together, but there was 6, 7, 8 players, along with some of the good old foundation players that actually took that team through. As I said, they had the dip. They brought Michael in just to secure things up in the middle. That worked, and then you had a great. I don't know whether it was that season that we had the League Cup run. 83-84, where we lost to Sunderland. I think that was a big disappointment for my dad. But anyway, that was another one where we lost in the semi-final to Sunderland in the League Cup. But that aside, and I think the Grimsby game, the final game of the season, and when Kerry put that ball in the back of the net, because we actually won it by goal difference. And that's where the 90 goals came in. It was, and we missed a penalty in that game as well, if I remember rightly. But the Chelsea fans were fantastic. Oh, my goodness, they were absolutely fantastic. It's great to see. I think one thing with Kerry Dixon, a lot of teams wouldn't take a risk because he was at Reading. He only paid, I think it was about 100 and something thousand for him. And they took a risk. And it was a calculated risk because my dad watched him a lot. And he honestly believed he would become an England international with the right team around him. And he did. And him and Speedie didn't get on well, I don't think, personally wise. But I tell you what on the football field, forget personalities. They were something special, weren't they? And it was great. It was a great season. Great players. The interesting thing is, I actually looked because when my dad left the club, obviously a lot of those players went. They were sold, and they got less. As I say, he cost less than, I think it was about 600,000 for the whole lot, 13 of them. They actually sold them for over 6 million. So from a business point of view, they did pretty well. I don't think it was a good move on a lot of these players because I think they were the foundation to build to go even further. And the club was, my dad's team was dismantled pretty quickly. And that was very sad. And I know that when my dad, although he was asked to leave, he got a little upset with it in the end.
Before we talk about sort of that era when your father left Chelsea, he must have spoken to you or your family about how excited he probably would have been to be back in the first division as a manager with Chelsea, with that squad competing against the big clubs in that era, the likes of Arsenal and Man United to an extent. Did he feel that this was, as you say, the start of something special with them players potentially seeing what develops? They could have a good cup run, compete well in the league, because that season, Chelsea finished sixth. And when I've spoken to players that were part of that side, to have a promoted team finish in that position probably wouldn't happen in this day and age.
No.
Plus, Chelsea did reach the League Cup semi-finals that year. And players like Pat, like Kerry, were becoming fan favourites. This must have been very special to watch, even for someone as yourself, seeing your dad pretty much create this. Although Ken Bates took the money up, it was your dad's creation, basically.
Yeah. And it was. He, with the help of Ian McNeil and the scouting abilities and the understanding of players, Ian was phenomenal. I can't say enough about Ian McNeil. It was you talk about Clough and Taylor and people like that. These were the quieter ones. It was Neal and McNeil. They were the quieter ones, but they got a job done, and they did it on a shoestring. And I always remember because my dad went into hospital and he had his heart issue, and they got over that, and he was feeling great. He was told to take it easy. So I always remember the first game against Arsenal, where Kerry scored the equaliser, and the Highbury erupted. I was amazed where there were Chelsea supporters. Yeah. There were Chelsea supporters everywhere. And that was, and you could see in my dad's face when that goal went in that, this is something special. And he expected that within probably 2 or 3 months that, he was coming out of it then. He was back to getting normal. And by the end of the season, he'd be ready to go again. And Ian actually was the caretaker manager. And my dad just expected to come back in. But John Hollins actually, I think, got the ear of Ken Bates. John Hollins was a very good coach. I don't think he was a very good manager from that point of view. And maybe I shouldn't say that, but my dad would probably be annoyed at me saying anything about people like that. But he knew that, I think. And at the end of that season, when John Hollins, and then you could see my dad being pushed to director of football. John Hollins never spoke to him about any advice or anything. And then Ian was kind of his assistant, but John didn't really want him as the assistant. Right. So, and then it came that he wanted to start selling some players. I explained about the Joey and the Michael thing, not wanting them to be away at Wrexham and not adhere to what they wanted. But then he wanted to change the format of play. So he, instead of where you gave the ball to Pat and the ball would go up the wing very quickly, go from defence to forward very, very quickly. My dad liked that. He liked to get the ball and not play it around the back and wait. And like they do today frustrates me. The England team frustrates me today because they get the ball and they play it back.
Yes.
And then they play it along.
Yes.
And then they play it back again. And it happens a lot in the Premier. It happens every league. I watch Wrexham and they do it. And I think, why are you doing this? Get the ball forward. And my dad was a great advocate for getting the ball forward. That's why he had people like Michael Thomas, Paul Canoville, Peter Rhodes-Brown, Pat Nevin. You gave the ball to him, in a blink of an eye, be up crossing it from the byline, and he started in his own half. But John Hollins wanted to take away that. He wanted a passing game. He wanted the passing game. So Pat said, well, that's not me. And a few others said, well, that's not us. That's not the way we've built this team. That's how we did so well in that 84-85 season because we got the ball back forward quickly. And you had two players in there with Speedie and Dixon who could put the ball away. You get the ball up there to them, let them do the work. And anyway, he wanted to change it. And so he started to move people like Pat Nevin out and that. And my dad got a little upset about that. He could see the way it was going. And he made, to the point, he said, I've got to say something. And he did. And unfortunately, that's when the falling out came. And
I was just going to ask, before we sort of discuss that side of things.
Sorry, I'm jumping ahead.
No. Like I said, the floor's yours. And with John technically moving upstairs, that's the term, sort of being director of football. Did he have any trepidation about it? Is it something that he thought because of his health, he had to do it? Or was it something that he was pretty much forced upon and thought, for me to sort of stay part of the clique, so to speak, this would be the best thing for him? Was this something that he wanted to do?
No, he didn't want to do that. There was no way on earth. My dad he's tracksuit manager. He wants to be out there with the boys. He wants to be out there working with them and talking to them. And he wasn't given that opportunity. He honestly believed he could continue after, the first season in the first division. He was coming back into it. He was actually coming back into it. And it was at the end of the season that Mr. Bates said, look, we've got a position for you. You need to relax. Well, he didn't need to relax. He knew he didn't need to relax. And my dad hated it. He hated, it was a position with Chelsea Football Club. He understood Ken Bates was the boss and that's what he wanted and that's what was going to happen. And he hated it. And I hated it. The family hated it for him. He would come in at night and he'd done nothing, but he could see a team. The first season he was back, as I say, where they ended up 6th, he was part of it. Him and Ian and John, to be fair, John Hollins as the coach. They worked together and they did well. But then they kind of pushed him to one side. John Hollins pushed Ian McNeil out. He went to Shrewsbury. And from a family point of view, it was a sad time for us. We got to see him a lot more, obviously, which has had a benefit. But it wasn't. It was a sad way for him to end his managerial career, I think.
And because of this, I'm assuming the friendship/relationship that your dad had with John Hollins probably would have changed a little bit, knowing that John would then become the manager, and then, as you say, he would have his own ideas about how he would want the team to play. He'd look at certain players. I believe Joey Jones left, as you say, quite shortly after John Hollins took over in 85, and there was other players that went to and from. Did your dad ever come to you or any other family members and sort of, voice his concerns about where Chelsea were going in terms of, okay, Chelsea are still in the first division, but he felt something wasn't right?
he put a very brave face on it.
Right.
He put a very brave face on. He would he It took him a lot to actually get his feelings out. He got to the point where he could see the total dismantling, and that was very out of character at the end, that he would do that, because John Hollins had a job to do and he appreciated that. He was put in a different position. He came with the family. We could see this isn't what he wanted. In fact, he actually, and I can say this now, he went after another job. He had an interview with Coventry City, and he didn't get the job. But he said, I can do this again. So that's how confident he was. But then he retired, and my mum and dad moved up to St Andrews in Scotland after retiring. But yeah, he did come to us, but it was kind of very low key. He was an introvert, and he had it all up here, but he wouldn't let it out, and we could see he was hurt by it.
Did it hurt him when Chelsea did get relegated in '88, knowing with what happened?
Unbelievably.
Obviously, Hollins left mid-season when Bobby Campbell took over, but as you say, the team that he created and the club that he was creating, it was a completely different club 3 to 4 years after that.
Yeah, it was. He was really upset about it. It broke his heart to see, the good work that Ken Bates had put in and everybody else had put in, just to see it do that. He was very happy with Bobby Campbell because he was good friends with Bobby Campbell. I can thank Bobby Campbell for my golf swing, because we played. It was great because he was a member of Wentworth, and he got me and my dad onto Wentworth. So yeah, he liked Bobby Campbell. A different character, different type of manager, but very player minded, and that was good. He knew a bit, and he did well for them. To be fair, he brought them back in, and he did a great job. And it was that kind of dip between '85 and I think it was '87 or '88 that kind of upset, because the plan that my dad had got when he started was, as I said right at the beginning, was a 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 year plan. The way that he knew the way he wanted to play football, he knew the players that he wanted, and it started to come together, and it did come together. And then for it to be dismantled, it was a little sad for him, I think. And but he, as I say, he was too much of a gentleman to actually to say anything. And he said, "Look, okay, if this is the way Chelsea want to do it, that's fine. They know best." Ken Bates had the club at heart all the time. So, you make decisions, and if they don't work, you change them. And that's what he did. He changed it, and they got back to where they should be. And today we know where they are. It's chalk and cheese. I think if you take a new supporter today from Chelsea and you said, then you were nearly bankrupt. The manager was driving a second-hand Datsun car, one other story I've got to say to you is when my dad first was there, they put my mum and dad up in the Hilton at Heathrow, and we were having dinner. I went down, my wife and I went down to meet them, and we were having dinner, and this supporter comes over and he says, "Can I have your autograph?" And my dad said, "Yeah, sure." So he gave it to him. Yeah, he says, "Oh, I thought it was Terry Neal. You're not manager of Arsenal?" So that summed me dad up. He's a guy from Seaham Harbour near Sunderland, very low profile, but this guy thought he was Terry Neal. So it was funny that he said, "Oh, you didn't want your autograph, I want Terry Neal's." So anyway, there we are. Another funny story. It was funny to us at the time because we laughed our heads off at it.
After sort of the 80s going into the 90s, did your father get the chance to go to any Chelsea matches? Was he invited by Ken Bates at all
Yes.
to sort of come back and sort of see how Chelsea have developed? Because Stamford Bridge, the ground itself was completely changed from what it was like in the 80s. was he pretty proud and pleased to see Chelsea winning the FA Cup in '97 and having that little spell in the late '90s with Ruud Gullit and before that with Glenn Hoddle? What was your father's take on that particular time at Chelsea, if you remember?
Oh, he was very, very proud to be a part of that organisation, and I think yes, he was invited back. I'm going to tell you, him and Ken Bates, even though at the end it got a little tense, he got on very, very well with him, and Ken and the backroom staff were brilliant with him. If there was anything going on, and they are with the players, Joey and Michael and the rest of them, they still go down and are invited down for players reunions and things. And he was invited. Now, he didn't get down as much as they were inviting him, simply because he lived in Scotland and he was getting older, and towards the end of his life he had dementia, which was very sad. My brother and I wanted to take him for the last time to Chelsea around I would say it was around 2008, and but he couldn't make it, sadly, and that was rather sad. But he was very, very proud of what he did. He was very, very proud of Chelsea. Because it's very easy to get a club to a certain level and then all of a sudden fade away and never come back. And Chelsea didn't do that. As I say, Ken Bates was the constant factor there, and he held it back. And my dad was proud to be the start. I think he was the start of it. I know that Jeff Hurst and a few others had some really nice players, good players there, but they also had some pretty poor players as well, and poor characters, unfortunately. But yeah, the foundations were set for what they are today. And the great thing about Chelsea Football Club is they never forget. If I ever call Chelsea Football Club and I say, look, I'd like to come. But when my father passed away, Chelsea invited me to the Tottenham game the Wednesday before his funeral, and on Thursday. And I got to tell you, it brings tears to my eyes today. The applause, they had a minute's applause, and even the Tottenham supporters were phenomenal. It was something really special. I've actually got that on. My friend came with me because he drove me down. The hospitality was lovely and everything, and he videoed it, and it was really touching. That long after, remember this is 83, 84. That long after, they still remembered him.
Yeah.
And I was amazed when I contacted the Atlanta Blues and said, look, I'd like to join your thing. My name's David Neal. I'm thinking they probably have no idea who he is. And sure enough, the amount of people that came back, oh, wow. And it
was stunning. It was stunning because I had sort of Brenda come to me and say, oh, we've got this gentleman by David. Have you seen our Facebook comments? Have you seen what's been sort of going on? So I've had a look, and there was comments galore. My God, it pretty much blew up. It was just incredible. And as you say, you talk about, okay, it was 83, 84, pretty much football has completely changed. The things I get from supporters and even from the players that I've interviewed that was part of that era, they still fondly remember that time when your dad was in charge. And it was just, from what I can gather from it, it was a happy time.
Yeah, it was. The players were great together. It really was a happy time. And, and I'm still in touch because I joined the 80s Memories, which is run by a gentleman called Harry Mitchell, and a great guy. And I joined that. Joey Jones said, join this 80s. He says, a lot of people talk about your dad. And I said, yeah, okay. So within hours of joining, Harry contacts me and says, hey, would you like to do a Facebook question and answer? And I said, yeah, sure, okay. And he said, oh, it'll take about an hour. I think it took about 2.5 hours because people were just asking questions after questions. And, biggest question, by the way, was, how do you get on with Ken Bates? You know, that's the biggest question I
Well,
get.
that's been answered today. So
Yeah,
if anybody
yeah,
sort of still is wondering,
yeah.
you've heard it here first, folks. And before we sort of conclude the interview, and again, David, thanks for coming on the show. It's been over the moon listening to these stories. It's been fantastic, and it's been a pleasure. Your father did pass away on the 23rd of November 2014 at the age of 82.
Yeah.
He's still, as I said, and we've discussed it, he's still fondly remembered by a lot of Chelsea fans from that era. And if there was sort of one thing that you could possibly put your hat on when you heard from Chelsea fans that wanted to give their condolences, was there one particular story you got from a Chelsea fan that was talking about your father? Do you have any sort of stories about like the feedback that you got from not just the fans but also the club itself?
Yeah. Oh, they were phenomenal. You know, it was the same at Middlesbrough and Wrexham, but Chelsea kind of were fantastic. And the couple of things, I think, to see Chelsea supporters, because my father, the funeral service was in Wrexham at the parish church there, a very big church. And the amount of Chelsea supporters that were there, you know, that, and I always remember one that my father, I think he was at Manchester United, and goes through, and the guy, one of the supporters actually said to him, he told me his name once, I forgot what it was, and he said he was getting his autograph as he was going in, and he said, I hope you enjoy the game. He goes, oh, I haven't got a ticket. And he says, my dad went in and bought him a ticket. Didn't go and get a compliment, went and bought him a ticket. And he says he bought the ticket out to him. And I heard that from a couple of Wrexham supporters as well, that he couldn't get any complimentary tickets or anything for him, but he went and bought him a ticket. And he said he gave it to him. And he said, and I think that's the type of thing. My dad he loved it. He, as I say, he's from Seaham Harbour, a coal mining town in the northeast of England. And he was down to earth, and he really appreciated the support. You know, people travelling up from London to see Chelsea play. You know, the least he could do was get them a ticket. You know, if they didn't have one, he was going to get them one, and that was nice. The guy wrote to me about that, and David Sorrell, he's another big Chelsea supporter. He's fanatical. He's got a whole range of photographs I've never seen.
Yeah.
And you know, we have our own family photographs, but he's got a great one of my mum and dad at Wembley for the cup final, which was the members' cup final, and I'd never seen it. And I said to David, have you got any more? And he said, yeah. He says, I've got loads. And so, you know, it's fantastic. The other one was he used to go down to the training grounds, and my dad used to invite him in. You know, a funny story. There was a lady whose son was a Chelsea supporter. It was at the time when there was a bit of roughness going on the terraces, and she said, "Look, my son is involved with this. Could you have a chat with him?" So my dad invited him in, and he was a thalidomide guy. I don't know whether he's still about. I'd love to see him if he is. And he sat him down and he talked to him. And anyway, that night he brought him home for dinner. He brought it to our house, and we had a lovely dinner with him. And my brother and I took him out to play football up at the school fields as well. So anyway, the following week, he goes away and comes back and comes to see my dad. And every single morning, his mom would send a bacon sandwich from my dad. And he'd walk into the ground and say, I'm here to see Mr. Neal with his bacon sandwich. And anyway, he used to visit us at my mum and dad's house at Chalfont St. Peter's. And we used to go across the pub and play some pool with him. And him and his girlfriend used to come. And it was great because his mother was because it kind of got him out of the, I'm going to call it aggro point of view, the violence side of it. And he enjoyed football. And my dad talked to him about football. And his mother was so appreciative that he kind of brought him in. And my dad did that. You know, he loved to hear from supporters. I think it gave him a bit of a kick to to hear what people had to say about the club and how well they were doing. Wasn't so good, as I say, when I sat in the stand at that Fulham in the 82-83 season. But it's so some great stories, some that my dad actually created by being a part of Chelsea Football Club, and the supporters. They just I don't think there's any supporters like them in the world. I really don't. They're just they're a cut above everybody else. I used to do a lot of travel to Asia, and you just go to Hong Kong. Chelsea supporters there. I remember being in a line in a supermarket, not supermarket, a restaurant, and there was this lady who was wearing a Chelsea. She said, "Oh, I'm the head of the." She was Caucasian. I said, "Yeah, I'm the head of the Chelsea Hong Kong Supporters Club." She said, "And I'm involved a lot with Chelsea Football Club." I said, "Wow." I said, "Yeah, okay." It's fantastic. You go anywhere, and it's the language of the world. Football's the language of the world. It doesn't matter who you support. I support Wrexham, I support Middlesbrough, I support Chelsea. It's just fantastic, and it's great to see my grandchildren all supporting them and enjoying it. It's been a great life for us all. My dad created an interesting life because we didn't have any background of football before he started playing for Silksworth, and here we are. Yeah, here we are, an hour and 15 minutes later, and I probably bored you to tears.
No, don't you dare say that. It's been an absolute pleasure. John Neal was the manager of Chelsea in 203 games, winning 84 of them with a win percentage of just over 41%. If there is one word to describe your father to conclude this today, what would it be?
One word.
Or you can have three.
I can have three. Okay.
Go on, have three.
I would say he's very respectful. He is quietly proud of what he achieved. I think he was quietly proud. He wouldn't get up on the roof with a flag waving and say, "Look what I did." He'll never do that. He would never do that. But he would be quietly proud, and proud of all the players he worked with, the supporters that eventually loved him. And I think he went to retirement very, very happy, with what he did in his playing career, his managerial career, with the three clubs he was there. So I think he was very proud. It was great because when you look at it, he ended up on a high note as a manager. He just got the clubs to the first division. They were sixth in the league, and they were going places. And I think it's always good. It's hard to leave on a high, I suppose, and he did. He left on a high. So yeah, there we go.
Well, David, I can absolutely say that this is one of the best interviews that we are likely to do, because we have remembered one of, as I said at the top of the show, one of the best loved and most popular Chelsea managers of all time, and I mean that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on to the show today. I've appreciated it, and I know our listeners in the UK and even in the US, where you are at the moment, are going to enjoy this. And hopefully, one day you can take the kids and the grandkids back to Chelsea and hopefully see them potentially win trophies again as they did under your father's.
Yeah, I hope so. I think they would love it. I'd certainly love it. I know that.
Brilliant. David, thank you very much for coming on to the show. And
thank you for giving me the opportunity to actually share some of the stories. I don't very often get a chance to do that.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. Okay. Bye-bye.